Hello and welcome back once again to After the Credits. Today we're talking about Wonder Woman. Probably the most anticipated movie out of the DC movie universe. The only one that surprisingly Warner Brothers hasn't fucked with too much. Part of that being that they don't have any faith in Wonder Woman as a standalone character. They don't think a female superhero is going to appeal to a male audience. And I think they really underestimate DC's female audience in this day and time. It's still a lot of the old guys who think the old ways, like back in the 40s, like girls buy girls' toys, boys buy boys' toys, and girls don't watch superhero shows and don't read superhero books and things like that. And they don't realize that it's a new millennium, it's a whole new structure in the society, and girls are actually a lot more into this stuff now. That's why a lot of the stuff is targeted more towards girls and even women. And I think maybe now they'll actually get the point that there's more to the female demographic in comics than they originally thought. So, Wonder Woman has been a box office success so far. But what did I think about it personally? For the most part, I liked it. There were a couple minor issues I had with it, and I'll get into those in a minute. But overall, I actually think this is probably one of the best DC films that they've put out so far. I didn't really have that big a problem with Man of Steel as much as everyone else did. I understood where they were going for with it. Before I get a lot of hate about that, let me explain to you guys how I view comic book movies. I view comic book movies and pretty much anything that even was potentially based on a comic or any type of story like that. The way I view these things is the same way I view comics. In comics, you have this idea of a multiverse. It originally started where they were Elseworld tales, where, we can tell this random story. For example, what is now Earth 2, where instead of Bruce Wayne's parents getting killed and Bruce Wayne becoming Batman, it was Bruce that got killed, and his dad became Batman, and his mom went insane and became the Joker, and blah, blah. A lot of the stuff that you see now in the Earth 2 comic, that used to just be Elseworld tales. They would just tell a random story that was not connected to the main universe. Later on, they decided, it's a multiverse structure, so there is a universe where this happened. Eventually, things start to bleed into each other and cross over. Then you have things like Crisis, you have things like Countdown, you have things like Flashpoint, where all this stuff comes crashing together to form a new main universe. But then, if you notice, almost immediately, following Flashpoint, we got the New 52, which was, all the universes are now one, here's where we're at. But if you actually followed the New 52 universe, there were 3 different Superman stories going on there, where Superman's a different character in each one. And then that all started to split apart to where now you have all these other stories. And now we have Rebirth, where everything's trying to merge back together, but still split back apart into the multiverse. And it's been like that repeatedly. Every time the universes fold together, they burst back apart because there's other stories artists want to tell that don't fit in the main canon. And then they're like, we're getting back in the multiverse thing. Let's slam everything back together. But they can't do that because there has to be this separation. It's an established thing. So because the idea of multiverse existing in comics, the way I look at every superhero movie that comes out is it's a different multiverse. So in one multiverse, the Christopher Reeve Superman exists. In another branch of the multiverse, the Brandon Roth Superman Returns Superman exists. In another multiverse line, even though it didn't get made, the Nicolas Cage Superman Lives exists. Same thing with Batman. You got the 60s Batman with Adam West. That's one line. You have another line where it's the Tim Burton verse. You have another line where even though they're continuations of the Tim Burton verse, the Joel Schumacher verse is it's the same universe as the first 2, but it's splitting apart because of the dramatic differences. That's crossing over into another line of the multiverse. The Nolan verse, that's another line. And now we get into the Batfleck and Henry Cavill universe. So when you come to that version of Man of Steel, I view it as a separate branch of the multiverse. So when you're looking at it Superman doesn't kill, he always finds a way not to, this is a separate universe. In this universe, just like in Tim Burton's 89, 90, whatever it was, Batman doesn't kill, but if you watch the Tim Burton films, he straight up puts a grenade down a guy's pants and blows him up. So in that universe, Batman kills. And by that same accord, in the Man of Steel, Henry Cavill universe, or multiverse line, Superman couldn't find another way to defeat Zod or not destroy the entire city, and that's that universe. You can even see it now in the TV series where technically Supergirl doesn't exist in the same universe as The Flash and Arrow. she's in a separate branch of the multiverse, but they're able to cross over dimensions. Just like the Harry Wells character, we've seen 3 different versions of him from 3 different universes, and Supergirl is a separate universe where a whole nother Harry Wells could exist, but we've never met that version, but we've met Supergirl. So these multiverses exist. So if you look at each movie as it doesn't follow the comics because a multiverse structure exists, that's how I'm able to put aside like this doesn't follow the comics and just enjoy the movie as a standalone piece because I look at it in a multiverse structure. So by that accord, I was able to enjoy Man of Steel. Batman v Superman, again, there were things I liked about that movie, things I didn't like about it. I'm sure there's a review of it on this channel somewhere. Go check it out. I'm sure I went over what they were, and I may have just explained all that in that video as well. So yeah, things are not without their issues. Suicide Squad, obviously Warner Brothers saw all the hate from Batman v Superman and went into panic mode and completely screwed up Suicide Squad. If you want to know why I feel that was screwed up, there's also a review of that on this channel, so you can go check that out as well. But then that brings us to Wonder Woman. The whole reason I brought all that up, again, they screwed up Suicide Squad by panicking because of Batman v Superman, but Wonder Woman, for some reason, they left alone. They're like, oh, no one's going to care about Wonder Woman, so let's just let that one stand on its own. We don't need to do any reshoots, blah, blah, blah. And I know some of the executives did try and get involved with a couple of the parts, and bless the director for fighting against them and being like, no, this is a key point. We need this in the movie to get to this point. And she fought a lot against the studio and won. And good for her because it made this movie a lot better. The main things I didn't like about the movie is there were times when Wonder Woman didn't feel like Wonder Woman. I was going to skip over the rundown of the whole movie and not really give you a lot of the details of what goes on. Basically, we start out on Themyscira. Wonder Woman's a young child. She's watching the other Amazons train, and she's trying to, like, mimic their movements and stuff. And when her babysitter catches her, you know, she's in trouble because she's not supposed to be running off, whatever. When she becomes a young teenager, you know, she does the same thing. She's still trying to learn how to fight. Her mother's against it, and her aunt tells her mother, you know, it'd be better if she knows how to defend herself in case she ever has to, versus treating her like a princess, and if something happens, she can't defend herself at all. So at first the mother's against it, so the aunt starts teaching her how to fight behind the mother's back, and eventually the mother realizes, yeah, you're right, I'm not doing her any service by not letting her at least learn how to defend herself in case the event that they're worried about actually happens. So she agrees to let her start training, and then one day Steve Trevor crashes on the island, and he ends up bringing the war to the island with him, and he and the Amazons fight off the war, but a lot happens. So Wonder Woman gets it in her head that this is all the work of Ares, and if she can go kill Ares, then the war stops. And then she can, you know, everything will be peaceful, and she never has to worry about anything again. And at first her mother's like, we don't need to get involved in the War of Men. And then she's like, well, the War of Men came to us, and that was purely by accident, so if we don't get involved, then, you know, it could happen again. So then finally she's like, fine, you can go fight the war with him, but by leaving, you know, you're exiling yourself, you won't be able to come back. And Wonder Woman's like, whatever, and leaves. So they leave Themyscira, they get back to England or wherever he was stationed. And he goes, I had to check in with my superiors. And she's like, you said you were taking me to the war. And he goes, I will, but, you know, I have to do this before I can take you over there. And so she's like, okay, fine. So she follows him around. And again, at first she's really being Wonder Woman. She's fitting the role. You know, she's told to wait outside, and she doesn't wait outside. She just walks into the war room. And all these military leaders are kind of looking at her and, like, stopping their conversation because they're like, why is there a woman in here? Because of the era that it's in. The one general's like, well, we can't really fight against this. Let's just let it play out, and then we'll kind of pick up the scraps. And she kind of calls him out on his bullshit, like, what kind of general are you? You know, a general where I'm from leads his troops into battle and doesn't sit behind closed doors and let the other people die without him even lifting a finger. And eventually Steve Trevor kind of escorts her out of the room, and she's like, well, what was all that bullshit? And he's like, well, you know, that's just the way this war is fought. And she's like, you know, what kind of war is this? So then she goes, well, you're going to take me to the war so I can end this. And he goes, okay, well, what part of the war do you want to go to? Because it spans dramatically. So he takes her to one point, and, you know, she sees all the devastation around her, and she wants to help everyone because that's who she is. She's Wonder Woman. She wants to help. And Steve's like, I used to be like that too. I wanted to help everyone, and eventually you realize you can't help everyone. You have to pick and choose your battles. And this is just kind of like devastating Wonder Woman because she's like, all this destruction, I'm not being allowed to do anything. So finally she gets to this point where they get to No Man's Land, where she's like, why are we not advancing and taking back this village? Because one of the women there says, they took our village, they took everything. And she's like, well, we have to help her, why are we not taking back this village? And Steve Trevor's like, we've tried. He goes, this is called No Man's Land for a reason. We've held this same line for like the past year, and we've not advanced a single inch. This is the point where I would have liked to have seen Wonder Woman become Wonder Woman. In a sense, she does, but at the same time, she doesn't. And what I mean by that is the comic book ideal of Wonder Woman is Steve Trevor says, we've held this line for a year, we haven't advanced an inch. That's why this is called No Man's Land, is because no man can cross it. That's where Wonder Woman should have been like, well, I'm not a man, and just walked out and did her thing. But instead, she gets like overly emotional. She gets almost whiny, like, I hate to say this because it'll sound misogynistic, but almost like a teenage girl who doesn't get her way, and she kind of throws a temper tantrum. And she's like, but we have to help, and gets like really whiny, and just like goes out and does her own thing, and then Steve's like, shit, cover her. But this whole scene, instead of Wonder Woman getting mopey and whiny, this is where she should have been getting angry and been getting enraged to the point where I'm tired of the bullshit of man. I'm not a man, whatever your man's world is, screw it. I'm going to do things my way now, and becoming Wonder Woman and being the Amazon that she is. But instead they make her overly emotional and, kind of, like I said, kind of whiny, kind of like a petulant child type of thing. And I know that's not the way they want her to come off, but that's the way it came off to me in the delivery of the lines. There's a lot of emotion there, and where, like I said, I would like to have seen the anger and the rage of Wonder Woman, I saw just a regular woman who didn't know how to convey that type of emotion, and literally almost cried in the scene. Like, her eyes were welling up and everything, and it's like, that's not how Wonder Woman would have reacted. Aside from this whole multiverse thing that I just laid down to you guys for 7 minutes, that's not how Wonder Woman would react in any of the universes. Wonder Woman is Wonder Woman. She is an Amazon. She doesn't understand the world of man not having women on an equal level. She sees that and she gets enraged by it. And if you really want to see a good representation of this, again, I hate to keep hearkening back to these in all these superhero movies, but a while back, DC did an animated Wonder Woman film. I actually own the DVD, but I don't happen to have it with me, otherwise I'd show it to you. Maybe I'll pop it up on the screen over here. But that depicts Wonder Woman more of what I would like to have seen in this film. Like, at one point in the animated film, Steve Trevor's secretary is like, oh, I dropped my pen, I need a man to lift up the desk and get it for me. Being a stereotypical woman of the 40s or 50s or 60s, whenever it was. But she's like, oh, I need a man to do this for me, where Wonder Woman just like picks up the desk and says, really, you need a man? What type of woman are you? And like slams the desk back down. And, it was like, that is the depiction of Wonder Woman, where this film, the Wonder Woman movie, doesn't capture that essence of Wonder Woman. It captures pretty close to what I would have liked to have seen, and like all the beats are there, like her marching across No Man's Land and just like taking fire. That was a good scene, but at the same time, all that emotional baggage that she was carrying with her at that point came off more as a stereotypical woman of that era versus Wonder Woman. Wonder Woman would have been just like, I'm tired of your bullshit, Steve. I'm not a man. I'm going to do this my way, and just marching out. And that's not what I got from here. And honestly, that's my biggest issue with this film. Besides those things where she's just like over-emotional girly, this was a good film. Like, even when she first sees Steve Trevor on the beach, like when he washes up on the beach when his plane crashes and she drags him out of the water, and he's laying there on the beach, she's just looking at him like so in awe of this guy, like she's instantly fallen in love with this guy that hasn't even spoken to her yet. He could be dead for all she knows, but she's just looking at him with these gaga eyes, like, oh, he's such a perfect man. Like, that whole thing, and it's like, that's not Wonder Woman either. Yeah, she was interested in the fact that he was a man and she hadn't seen a man before, but she wasn't like, oh my god, I'm in love with this guy that I just met. And that whole, like, Disney princess bullshit. Like I said, there's a lot of points where I see Wonder Woman in this film, and there's a lot of points where I see somebody who doesn't understand the character of Wonder Woman and what she represents. And again, I don't think that's so much on the director. It could be more on the actor. But at the same time, I feel that Gal Gadot, as much as I didn't think she fit the part of Wonder Woman, and even in like Batman v Superman, yeah, she was the best part of that film, but I still didn't like her casting. But seeing her in this film, it seems like she actually knows the character enough to portray certain things, but maybe not enough to separate the emotion the way Wonder Woman would. I mean, if you look at Gal Gadot's performance of Wonder Woman in either of the films versus, say, Margot Robbie's portrayal of Harley Quinn in Suicide Squad, you can tell Margot Robbie knew nothing about that character, the director knew nothing about that character, and they just kind of winged it based off the little bit of information they had. Where in Wonder Woman, the director understood Wonder Woman to a degree, and Gal Gadot understands Wonder Woman to a degree. They just couldn't separate out that little bit that made her a woman versus a Wonder Woman, if that makes sense to anybody. And I'm not trying to sound misogynistic about it, because that's the thing is Wonder Woman overcame misogyny without playing into the stereotypes of what a woman would be in that era. Playing up to the stereotypes is something she learned when she learned, I have to live in this world, I can't go back to Themyscira, I'm here now. So in my secret identity, I have to play up to being this ideal of what people think a woman is, but when I'm Wonder Woman, that all goes out the window. And I think that's the separation they were having trouble getting is she doesn't have her secret identity yet. It's building a little bit in the first part where Steve Trevor takes her back to London. That's just starting to develop her secret identity. But at the same time, they don't separate the fact that she has to learn these mannerisms versus having them naturally. And I think that was the biggest downfall of this movie. So anyway, moving forward with the plot line, because this is already almost 30 minutes long, they get to the war front. And at first, Steve Trevor's like, there is no Ares. Humankind is just messed up. Men go to war because they want to go to war, because of greed, because of whatever. Basically saying it's a dick measuring contest. And Wonder Woman's like, no. And again, it gets emotional. Like, no, it can't be that. It has to be Ares because this is what I believe. And if it's not my beliefs, then what am I? And it's like that whole, again, whiny girl thing. And then surprise, Ares shows up, which... That's not a spoiler, by the way. Everyone was expecting Ares to show up. They just didn't show him in the trailer because they didn't want to spoil who he was, which, awesome. Because who I thought he was going to be and who he ended up being, two separate people. That is a spoiler, by the way, but who you think is Ares in the movie isn't, but I'm not going to tell you who it is, because that's an even bigger spoiler. But yeah, when Steve Trevor throws out the whole, the Easter Bunny's not real type of thing to her, she gets that whiny girl mentality like, no, it has to be. And then, like, when Ares finally shows up and he's like, yeah, I'm real, she's like, oh, hey, my emotions are justified now because I was right. No, that's missing the point of Wonder Woman. But then there's a whole epic battle between Ares and Wonder Woman, and at that point, I kind of lost interest in the movie because then what was basically a decent film for a period piece and a war piece, which are things I usually don't like. I'm okay with period pieces based on what period they're in, and I'm not really a big World War I, World War II period piece type of thing. Like I said, that's why I didn't like the first Captain America film, is it spent too much time there versus balancing it between modern day and past tense. Where this, it works better being a period piece, but that all kind of goes out the window once the final battle shows up, because then it goes from being this period piece, this war film, to being basically the last 20 minutes of Batman v Superman all over again, where it's just a lot of large over-the-top explosions and flying at each other and fighting and all this shit, and it's just like, it doesn't really wrap up the story it was telling. It's like, hey, we have this war film, and what's going on with these characters, and then it's like, oh, by the way, here's an epic superhero versus supervillain battle over here, and then it's like, okay, oh yeah, we gotta wrap up with these other characters that we forgot about because we just crapped this big mess of over-budget CGI bullshit onto the screen. It does wrap up, the characters and gets Wonder Woman to where she understands that she's in a world that she doesn't understand, and she has to kind of play along and be someone she's not to hide who she really is so that she can help. But then it goes back to the present time where she's been inactive for so long, and she's like, well, I tried to help once and it didn't work out so well, so that's why I stopped helping. And it's like, okay, but you didn't explain how you got there. Why did you stop helping? You fought against Ares, you won against Ares, you realized the world wasn't what you thought it was, and had to pretend to fit in where you didn't, kind of like Superman trying to fit in as Clark Kent. But then it never explains like why she decided to stop being Wonder Woman. It's like, okay, I had this one go and now fuck it, I'm just Diana Prince. I'm never going to do anything again. But that's not the way the war scene ended off. The war scene ended off with she continued to help for several years before some other event happened that made her stop. But we never really get what that event was. It was like this event, her conversation and battle with Ares when she first encountered the man's world is what made her stop being Wonder Woman. And it just doesn't make sense. It was one outing where you learned something about yourself and about the world that you didn't know before, and that's what made you stop? And that's not the way the ending of the period piece reflected at all when you go back into modern times. It's like there's a huge chunk of something else that happened there at the end that was dropped that would have wrapped up the story a lot more nicely and understood why she decided to no longer be Wonder Woman. But it doesn't explain that. It's just like, oh yeah, now back to present time, she's looking at the old photo, and she's like, I tried to help once, and it didn't work out too well, that's why I stopped being Wonder Woman, but you know what, I guess I can join up your little team and help again. And it's like, you didn't explain why you stopped. What is missing from here? Add another 20 minutes in, extend the movie out a little bit more and explain what finally made her. Have her spit out some dialogue or something that said, I continued on for years, but nothing seemed to change. And after so many years, it's just like enough. And that would have made more sense because then you could have like flashes to different battles with her and saw her physically get worn down to where she just didn't want to do it anymore. Like friends dying or whatever, to where it was like just destroying her mentally. And that would have made sense, but no, we didn't get any of that. It's just like, oh yeah, period piece is over, back to real world, and it's like, you could have gave us flashes of time, and it would have made more sense. So those are my main problems with the film. So what would I give it as far as a star rating? Despite the problems with this one, I think I'm still going to give it a 4. I was going to say a 3.5, but this is a 5-star rating system, and I rarely ever go above a 4. And I think had they understood the character of Wonder Woman a little bit more, fit the epic fight scene at the end in a little bit better, and wrapped up the story of why she stopped being Wonder Woman a little bit better, it probably would have been up to like a 4.5, but because of those glaring issues, it gets knocked down. And like I said, I was going to do a 3.5, but that's kind of saying it's just above a middle of the road, and it's only slightly better than a middle of the road. And it's not. This film is still a solid film, regardless of those points. If you can overlook those couple things that I mentioned, this is still a solid film. But that's basically the issues I had with it, where I think it could have improved. And hopefully if Warner Brothers can look at this and say, hey, we didn't get involved with this and it did better than all the other shit we kept doing reshoots on, maybe they'll start getting better films. Maybe they'll start being able to match Marvel at what they're doing. But we'll see because, Justice League is the next thing on their list, and they've already done several sets of reshoots, and from what I've heard, they've done enough reshoots on Justice League to make about 4 different Justice League films. So we'll see which one we end up getting, because the newest preview I saw is completely different than our first look preview, which actually looked kind of decent. But I'm not going to get into that now because this is already long enough. So yeah. Wonder Woman gets a 4 from me, but it's not without issues. Nothing else to say about it other than that. So again, as always, thank you guys for watching. Remember, like, comment, subscribe, share the video. Links are down in the description. Click the bell up there in the corner. Make sure you're getting notifications every time I post new content. And until next time, I'll see you after the credits.